I watched them argue over his money. None of them knew about the letter in my hand. The lawyer's office felt like a battlefield, with Harold's family arranged in opposing camps around the mahogany conference table. His eldest son Marcus sat rigid in his chair, his expensive suit armor against the accusations flying across the room. His daughter Patricia clutched her purse like a shield, her voice shrill as she demanded answers about trust funds and property deeds. His younger son David slumped in the corner, already calculating his share of an inheritance he'd never earned. And there was Vivian, Harold's second wife, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the table as she listened to her stepchildren dissect her 15-year marriage with surgical precision. The beach house should go to family, Marcus was saying, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been denied anything. Real family. Not someone who married Dad when he was already 70. I was his wife, Vivian replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I took care of him for 15 years while you were too busy with your own lives to visit. You took care of his money, Patricia snapped. Don't pretend this was some great love story. You were 45 and he was 70. We all know what that was about. I sat in the chair closest to the window, watching this family tear itself apart over Harold's estate, and felt the weight of the letter in my jacket pocket. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive, with my name written in Harold's careful script, for Grace Mitchell to be opened only after the will reading. Harold had given it to me 3 weeks before he died, pressing it into my hands during one of our Tuesday afternoon visits. He'd been sitting in his favorite chair by the library window, the autumn light, making his white hair look like spun silver. Grace, he'd said, his voice already thin from the cancer that was stealing him piece by piece. I need you to promise me something, anything, Harold, when I'm gone. When they're all fighting over what I've left behind, I need you to remember who I really was. Not the man they think they knew, but the man you actually knew. I'd promised. Of course. I'd been Harold's personal assistant for 23 years, longer than any of his marriages, longer than some of his children had been alive. I'd managed his calendar, organized his files, kept his secrets, and watched him build an empire that his family now considered their birthright. But they didn't know Harold the way I knew Harold. They didn't know about the anonymous donations to children's hospitals, the scholarships he'd funded for underprivileged students, the small acts of kindness he'd performed without fanfare or recognition. They saw only the successful businessman, the demanding father, the wealthy widower who'd married a woman 30 years his junior. They had no idea who he really was beneath all that money and power. The will is very clear. Mr. Thornton, Harold's lawyer, was saying, he was a distinguished man in his 60s who'd handled Harold's legal affairs for decades. Your father left specific instructions about the distribution of his assets. Then read it, David said, his impatience obvious. Let's get this over with. Thornton adjusted his glasses and opened the thick document. The last will and testament of Harold James Whitmore. To my son Marcus, I leave the family business, Whitmore Industries, along with all associated assets and responsibilities. Marcus smiled for the first time since entering the room. The business was worth $40 million, and he'd been waiting his entire adult life to inherit it. To my daughter Patricia, I leave the house on Beacon Street, the art collection, and $2 million in liquid assets. Patricia nodded approvingly. The house alone was worth $3 million, and the art collection was priceless. To my son David, I leave the vacation properties in Aspen and Martha's Vineyard, along with $1 million. David's face fell slightly. His inheritance was substantial, but clearly smaller than his siblings. What about the rest, the investments, the stock portfolio? To my wife Vivian, Thornton continued, I leave the remainder of my liquid assets, approximately $8 million, along with the right to remain in our shared home for the rest of her life. The room erupted. Marcus shot to his feet, his face flushed with anger. $8 million. That's ridiculous. She was married to him for 15 years. We're his children. 15 years of taking care of him, Vivian said quietly. 15 years of managing his medications, driving him to doctor's appointments, listening to him worry about all of you. You were paid to take care of him, Patricia said coldly. It's called being a wife, and you were supposed to love him, Vivian replied. It's called being a daughter. When was the last time any of you visited him? Really visited, not just showed up when you needed money. The accusations flew back and forth across the table, each family member defending their claim to Harold's wealth while attacking everyone else's motives. I listened to them reduce 23 years of my employer's life to dollars and cents, watched them turn his death into a competition for his assets. None of them mentioned Harold himself. None of them shared memories of his kindness, his humor, his quiet generosity. None of them seemed to be grieving the man, only calculating their share of what he'd left behind. There's one more bequest, Thornton said, his voice cutting through the arguing. To Grace Mitchell, my personal assistant and trusted friend, I leave the sum of $500,000. Along with my personal library and my gratitude for 23 years of loyal service. The room went silent. Every head turned to look at me, and I could see the calculation in their eyes. $500,000 was more than most people saw in a lifetime, but it was also money they'd expected to inherit themselves. $500,000. Marcus's voice was dangerously quiet. For a secretary, personal assistant, I corrected automatically, though I knew it wouldn't matter to him. She's not family, Patricia said. She has no right to Dad's money. I have every right, I said, standing slowly. Your father left it to me legally and willingly. But you're right about one thing. I'm not family. I'm something much rarer in Harold's life. I'm someone who loved him without wanting anything in return. David laughed bitterly. Right? That's why you're walking away with $500,000. I'm walking away with $500,000 because your father valued loyalty over blood relation. Because he knew the difference between people who loved him and people who loved his money. I reached into my jacket pocket and felt the letter Harold had given me, the envelope that contained words meant only for my eyes. But looking at this family, at the way they were dishonoring Harold's memory with their greed and resentment, I wondered if he'd intended for me to share its contents. Grace, Vivian said quietly. Thank you for everything you did for Harold. He talked about you constantly, how much he relied on you, how grateful he was for your friendship. Marcus scoffed. She was an employee, a well-paid employee, apparently. I looked at Marcus as a man who'd inherited his father's business, but none of his character, and made a decision that would change everything. You want to know what your father really thought about all of you? I asked, my voice steady, despite the racing of my heart. You want to know why he left his money the way he did? What are you talking about? Patricia demanded. I pulled the letter from my pocket and held it up for them to see. Your father gave me this 3 weeks before he died. He told me to open it after the will reading, after I'd seen how you all reacted to his final wishes. What does it say? Vivian asked, her voice barely a whisper. I looked around the room at Harold's family, at the people who'd spent the last hour proving everything he'd suspected about their motives. It says, I replied, that Harold knew exactly who each of you really were, and he planned accordingly. The silence that followed my words was deafening. 5 pairs of eyes stared at the cream-colored envelope in my hands as if it contained the secrets of the universe. In a way, it did, at least, the secrets of Harold Whitmore's universe. You're bluffing, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Dad wouldn't have written some secret letter about us, wouldn't he? I asked, settling back into my chair. Harold documented everything, Marcus. Every business decision, every family interaction, every disappointment. Did you really think he wouldn't document his final thoughts about the people he was leaving his fortune to? Thornton cleared his throat. Grace, if Harold left you a letter with instructions about when to open it, that's between you and him. But I should mention that there are additional provisions in the will that haven't been read yet. Additional provisions. David leaned forward, hope flickering in his eyes. Maybe there was more money after all. Harold included what he called conditional bequests. Thornton explained, inheritances that depend on certain criteria being met. What kind of criteria? Patricia demanded. I think, I said quietly. That depends on what's in this letter. I broke the seal carefully, aware that everyone in the room was watching my every movement. Harold's handwriting filled 3 pages, his words as precise and thoughtful as everything else he'd done in his 85 years. My dear Grace, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and my family is probably fighting over my money like vultures over carrion. I hope I'm wrong about that, but I suspect I'm not. You've been the most constant presence in my life for over 2 decades. You've seen me at my best and my worst. You've kept my secrets and shared my burdens, and you've never once asked me for anything beyond fair compensation for your work. In a life filled with people who wanted something from me, you were the one person who simply wanted to help me be better than I was. I know my family resents the money I've left you. They see it as charity, as an old man being sentimental about his secretary. They don't understand that you earned every penny through years of loyalty, discretion, and genuine care. They don't understand because they've never given those things freely themselves. Grace, I need you to be my voice now, that I can't speak for myself. I need you to tell them what I couldn't say while I was alive, that I knew exactly who they were, and I planned my estate accordingly. I looked up from the letter to find Harold's family watching me, with expressions ranging from curiosity to dread. He knew, I said simply. Harold knew exactly how each of you felt about him, and exactly why you felt that way. That's impossible, Patricia said, but her voice was shaking. We loved Dad. We were a close family. Were you? I asked. When was the last time you visited him, Patricia? Really visited, not just stopped by when you needed money for your husband's business ventures. Patricia's face went white. How do I managed Harold's calendar for 23 years? I know that in the last 5 years of his life, you visited him exactly 7 times. 4 of those visits ended with you asking for loans. I turned to David. And you, David. Harold used to sit in his study after you'd call, staring at the phone and wondering why his youngest son only contacted him when the rent was due or the credit cards were maxed out. That's not true, David protested, but he couldn't meet my eyes. Harold kept records, I said gently. He documented every phone call, every visit, every request for money. He was hoping to find evidence that you loved him for himself, not just for what he could provide. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is ridiculous. You're trying to turn us against each other to justify your own inheritance. Am I returned to Harold's letter, finding the section I knew would cut deepest. Harold wrote, Marcus believes he's entitled to everything I've built simply because he's my eldest son. He's spent 40 years waiting for me to die so he could take over the business, never once asking if he's actually qualified to run it. He sees my success as his birthright rather than something he needs to earn. Marcus's face turned red. Dad said that. He said more. I continued reading. Marcus has never shown interest in the charitable work that defines who I am. He's never asked about my values, my hopes for the company's future, my concerns about its impact on the community. He wants to inherit my wealth without inheriting my responsibilities. That's not fair, Marcus said, but his voice was weak. Isn't it? Harold told me about the conversation you had last Christmas, when you suggested he should stop throwing money away on charity and focus on building wealth for the family. Do you remember that conversation, Marcus? Marcus sat down heavily, the fight going out of him. I turned to the letters section about Patricia. Your father wrote, Patricia sees me as a bank account with a heartbeat. Every conversation we have eventually turns to money, her husband's failing business, her children's private school tuition, her need for a larger house. She's never once asked about my health, my loneliness, my fears about dying. I'm not her father. I'm her financial safety net. Patricia was crying now, mascara streaking down her cheeks. But I did love him. I do love him. Did you, or did you love what he could do for you? I asked gently. Harold used to tell me about the phone calls. Patricia, how you'd start with, how are you, Dad? And end with, could you help us with the mortgage payment? He said it broke his heart every time. Vivian, who had been silent throughout this revelation, spoke up quietly. What did he say about me? I found Harold's words about his second wife, and my heart ached as I read them. He said, Vivian married an old man because she thought it would be easy money. She expected me to die within a few years, leaving her a wealthy widow. Instead, she got 15 years of caring for someone with increasingly poor health, and she never complained. She never asked for more money, never pushed for a larger inheritance, never made me feel like a burden. She may have married me for the wrong reasons, but she stayed for the right ones. Vivian's tears were silent, but genuine. He knew why I married him. He knew everything, Vivian. But he also knew that you chose to love him anyway, that you became the wife he needed. Even if you weren't the wife you'd planned to be, Thornton had been listening to all of this with the careful attention of someone who'd spent decades managing family drama. Grace, you mentioned conditional bequests. Does Harold's letter explain those? I turned to the final page of Harold's letter, where his true intentions were revealed. Harold wrote, I've left each of my children what they've earned through their relationship with me. Marcus gets the business because he's the only one qualified to run it, but his inheritance comes with conditions. Patricia gets the house and art collection because she appreciates beautiful things. But she needs to prove she can appreciate them without selling them for quick cash. David gets the vacation properties because he's always loved them, but he'll need to demonstrate that he can maintain them responsibly. What kind of conditions? Marcus asked, his voice barely audible. For you, Marcus, the business comes with a 5-year commitment to maintain Harold's charitable giving at current levels. If you reduce the charitable budget by more than 10% in any given year, control of the company transfers to a board of trustees. Marcus's face went gray. Harold's charitable giving represented nearly $2 million annually. Patricia, you can keep the house and art collection as long as you don't sell any pieces for 5 years. If you sell anything before then, the entire collection goes to the Metropolitan Museum. Patricia made a small sound of distress. She'd probably already been planning which pieces to sell first. And David, the vacation properties are yours as long as you personally maintain them and don't rent them out for commercial purposes. If you turn them into rental properties, they'll be donated to a nonprofit that provides vacation opportunities for underprivileged families. David slumped in his chair. He thought of everything. He thought of everything because he loved you, I said. All of you. But he also knew that love without boundaries isn't really love, it's enabling. Harold spent the last years of his life hoping you'd prove him wrong about your motives. When you didn't, he decided to give you one last chance to prove you could be better than he feared you were. The room was silent, except for the sound of Patricia's quiet crying and the tick of the antique clock on Thornton's desk. What about you? Vivian asked finally. What did Harold say about your inheritance? I smiled, remembering Harold's final words to me before he'd given me the letter. He said I was the only person in his life who'd never disappointed him. The only person who'd loved him without conditions or expectations. He said my inheritance wasn't a reward. It was a gift from someone who finally understood the difference. 3 months after Harold's funeral, I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by boxes of his personal papers that his family had been too eager to discard. They'd taken the valuable items, the expensive furniture, the artwork, the jewelry, but they'd left behind the things that actually mattered. Harold's journals, his correspondence, the records of his charitable work. I'd been going through these papers slowly, partly because there were so many of them, but mostly because each document felt like a conversation with Harold, a chance to understand the man I'd worked beside for 23 years but had never fully known. What I was discovering changed everything. The doorbell rang, interrupting my reading. Through the peephole, I could see Vivian standing in the hallway, looking uncertain and somehow smaller than she had in the lawyer's office. Vivian, I said, opening the door. This is a surprise. I hope you don't mind me coming by. I got your address from Mr. Thornton. She looked around my modest living room, taking in the boxes of papers and the simple furniture. I wanted to talk to you about Harold. Of course. Can I get you some tea? That would be nice. As I prepared tea in my small kitchen, I could hear Vivian moving around the living room, probably looking at the papers I'd spread across every available surface. Grace, she called, what is all this? Harold's personal papers. His family didn't want them, so Mr. Thornton asked if I'd go through them and decide what should be preserved. I returned with the tea to find Vivian holding a leather-bound journal, her face pale as she read. "This is Harold's handwriting," she said. "Yes, he kept detailed journals for over 40 years. I'm trying to organize them chronologically. Grace, listen to this." Vivian's voice was shaking as she read from the journal. March 15th, 1995. Vivian agreed to marry me today. I know she's not in love with me. How could she be? I'm 30 years older, set in my ways, and probably have 10 years left at most. But she's kind, and she's honest about what she wants. I'd rather have someone who marries me for security and treats me well than someone who claims to love me and treats me poorly. Vivian set down the journal and looked at me with tears in her eyes. He knew from the beginning Harold was a very perceptive man. But Grace, that's not the part that's bothering me. Listen to this entry from 5 years later. She picked up the journal again. March 15th, 2000. 5 years married to Vivian today. I think I'm falling in love with my wife. Not the desperate, passionate love of youth, but something deeper. She's become my companion, my confidant, my friend. She laughs at my jokes, listens to my worries, and never makes me feel like a burden. I married her for companionship, but she's given me something I never expected. Happiness. I set down my teacup, understanding why Vivian looked so shaken. There's more, she continued, flipping through pages. March 15th, 2005. 10 years with Vivian, but children still treat her like an outsider, still assume she's only here for the money. They don't see what I see, that she's become the heart of this house. She remembers everyone's birthdays, sends cards to the grandchildren, makes sure I take my medications. She's not just my wife, she's become my family in a way my actual family never was. Vivian was crying openly now. He loved me, really loved me. Yes, I said gently. He did. But I did marry him for the money, Grace, at least at first. I was 45, divorced, struggling to pay my bills. When Harold proposed, I saw security, not love. And then I got to know him. The real him, not the intimidating businessman everyone else saw. He was funny, Grace, and kind, and so lonely. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. I fell in love with him too, but I was afraid to believe he could love me back. I thought he'd always see me as the woman who'd married him for his money. I reached across the coffee table and pulled out another journal. This one from Harold's final year. "Vivian, there's something else you need to see." I found the entry I'd been looking for and handed her the journal. "Read this." Vivian's voice was barely a whisper as she read. Harold's words aloud, January 10th, 2023. "Told Dr. Morrison today that I probably have 6 months left. The cancer is spreading faster than we'd hoped. I need to prepare Vivian for what's coming, but I don't know how. She's been taking care of me for months without complaint, managing my medications, driving me to appointments, pretending she doesn't notice how much weight I've lost. I married her thinking she'd be a convenient companion for my old age. Instead, she's become the love of my life, just as I'm about to leave her." "Oh, Harold," Vivian whispered. "There's more," I said, turning to another page. February 14th, 2023. Vivian gave me a Valentine's card today. Inside, she wrote, "Thank you for 15 years of being loved. Not 15 years of love, but 15 years of being loved." She understands the difference. She knows that I loved her, not because she was perfect, but because she was perfectly herself with me. I wish I had told her that while I still had the strength to say it properly. Vivian set down the journal and looked at me through her tears. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because Harold's children think you married him for his money and stayed for his money. But Harold knew better. He knew that you stayed because you loved him, even if you didn't start that way. But the inheritance, Grace, $8 million. It looks like exactly what they think it is, payment for services rendered." I stood and walked to one of the boxes I hadn't opened yet, pulling out a thick folder marked Financial Records, Personal. Inside were bank statements, investment reports, and a document that made everything clear. Vivian, Harold didn't leave you $8 million. What do you mean? I mean the $8 million was already yours. Look at this. I handed her a bank statement from 3 years ago. Harold opened a joint account in both your names and transferred $8 million into it. Legally, that money became half yours the moment he deposited it. Vivian stared at the bank statement. I don't understand. Harold was protecting you. He knew his children would contest the will if he left you a large inheritance. So instead, he made you a joint owner of assets while he was still alive. The inheritance mentioned in the will was just the legal formality of transferring full ownership to you. But why didn't he tell me? I pulled out another document, a letter addressed to Vivian, sealed and marked to be given to my wife after my death. He did tell you. He just wanted to make sure you heard it at the right time. Vivian opened the letter with shaking hands and read silently for several minutes. When she finished, she was crying again, but these were different tears. What does it say? I asked gently. He says he loved me more than he ever loved anyone. That I gave him the happiest 15 years of his life. That the money isn't payment for taking care of him. It's his way of taking care of me after he's gone. She looked up at me. Grace, he says he changed his will 5 times in the last year, trying to find a way to provide for me without giving his children ammunition to challenge it. Harold was always thinking 3 steps ahead, but there's something else. Vivian's voice was puzzled. He mentions you in this letter. He says you know about the other provisions and that I should ask you about them when I'm ready. I felt my heart rate increase. I'd been wondering when this moment would come, when I'd have to reveal the full scope of Harold's final plans. Vivian, how much do you know about Harold's charitable work? I know he donated a lot of money, a couple million a year. I think it was more than that. Much more. I pulled out another folder, this one thick with donation records and correspondence. Harold gave away approximately 60% of his income every year for the last 20 years. The family business, the investments, the properties, they generated about $20 million annually. Harold kept $8 million for living expenses and gave away $12 million. Vivian's eyes widened. $12 million a year. That single quotes asked ... double quotes $240 million over 20 years. Harold was one of the most generous philanthropists in the city, but he did it all anonymously. Why anonymously? Because he said charity should be about helping people, not building your reputation. But also because he was testing his family. He wanted to see if they'd support his charitable work, if they knew about it, or if they'd try to stop him to preserve their inheritance. And Marcus found out about the donations 3 years ago. He confronted Harold and demanded that he stop throwing money away and start thinking about family. Patricia discovered the charitable giving last year and suggested Harold should be more responsible with the family wealth. David never found out, but he'd been pressuring Harold to invest more aggressively, so there would be more to pass down. Vivian was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. So Harold's children failed his test. They failed spectacularly. But Vivian, you passed a test you didn't even know you were taking. What do you mean? I pulled out the final document from Harold's personal papers, a legal trust agreement dated just 2 months before his death. Harold established the Vivian Whitmore Charitable Foundation with an endowment of $50 million. You're the sole trustee. With complete authority over how the money is distributed, Vivian stared at the document as if it were written in a foreign language. $50 million. For charity. Harold's final gift to you wasn't just financial security. It was the chance to continue his life's work, to be the generous person he always knew you were. 6 months after discovering the charitable foundation, I found myself in Harold's former study, now transformed into the headquarters of the Vivian Whitmore Charitable Foundation. The room that had once been filled with business documents and financial reports now overflowed with grant applications, thank you letters from recipients, and photographs of the lives being changed by Harold's posthumous generosity. Vivian sat behind Harold's old desk, but she'd made the space her own, where Harold had kept ledgers and investment portfolios. Vivian had family photos and handwritten notes from scholarship recipients. Where Harold had displayed his business awards, Vivian had hung children's drawings sent by families who'd received help with medical bills. The Peterson family wants to name their new baby after Harold, Vivian said, holding up a letter. Little Harold Peterson, born healthy thanks to the prenatal care we funded when their insurance wouldn't cover it. Harold would have loved that, I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. He always said the best investments were the ones that paid dividends in human happiness. Grace, I need to ask you something. Vivian set down the letter and looked at me with the serious expression she'd developed since taking over the foundation. How much did you know? About the foundation, about Harold's plans, about everything. I'd been expecting this question for months. I knew some of it. Harold involved me in his charitable giving from the beginning. I helped research organizations, process donations, maintain the anonymity he wanted. But I didn't know about the foundation until after he died. But you knew he was testing his family, I suspected. Harold was always watching people, always trying to understand their motivations. In his final years, he became more deliberate about it. Vivian stood and walked to the window that overlooked the garden Harold had loved. I keep thinking about that letter he left me. He said he changed his will 5 times in the last year. Do you know what the other versions said? I did know, because Harold had asked me to witness each revision, but I'd hoped Vivian would never ask. Vivian, are you sure you want to know? I need to know. I need to understand what he was thinking. I pulled out a folder I'd brought from home, copies of Harold's previous wills, each one a window into his evolving understanding of his family. The first version, from 18 months ago, left everything equally divided between his 4 children and you. Traditional family inheritance. What changed his mind? Marcus's conversation about stopping the charitable giving. Harold realized that his eldest son saw philanthropy as waste rather than purpose. I opened the second will. Version 2 reduced Marcus's inheritance and increased yours. But then Patricia discovered the charitable donations and made her comments about family wealth. Harold realized she had the same attitude as Marcus. And the third version cut David's inheritance significantly after he pressured Harold to invest more aggressively for the family's future. Harold said David saw him as a financial resource rather than a father. Vivian returned to her chair, her face thoughtful. So each time one of his children disappointed him, he revised the will in my favor. Not exactly. Each time one of his children revealed their true priorities, Harold revised the will to reflect what he'd learned about their character. I opened the fourth will. This version, from 6 months before he died, left you the bulk of the estate, but included harsh conditions for his children. Marcus would have inherited the business only if he maintained Harold's charitable giving at current levels for 10 years. Patricia would have received the house only if she agreed to open it for charity events twice a year. David would have gotten the vacation properties only if he allowed them to be used for underprivileged families half the time. That sounds punitive. Harold thought so too. That's why he wrote the 5th version, the one that was actually read. He realized that punishing his children wouldn't change them, and it wouldn't honor the values he wanted to preserve. So instead, he created the foundation. Instead, he gave his children exactly what they'd earned through their relationships with him, and he gave you the chance to continue his real legacy. Vivian was quiet for a long moment, staring at the papers spread across her desk. Grace, there's something I need to tell you, something I've been struggling with for months. What is it? I don't think I'm the right person for this. The foundation, the responsibility, the decisions about who gets help and who doesn't. Harold was brilliant at this kind of work. He understood business, finance, human nature. I'm just someone who happened to marry him. I leaned forward, recognizing the self-doubt that had been eating at Vivian since she'd discovered the scope of her inheritance. Vivian, do you remember what Harold wrote in his final letter to you about why he chose you to run the foundation? He said, I had a good heart. He said more than that. He said you had the one quality that mattered most for charitable work, the ability to see people as individuals rather than statistics. He said you understood that behind every grant application was a real person with real struggles, and that you'd never lose sight of that humanity. But I don't know anything about running a foundation. I don't have Harold's education, his experience. You have something better. You have empathy. You have the ability to connect with people who are struggling because you've struggled yourself. Vivian looked surprised. Harold told you about my first marriage, about the financial problems. He told me that you understood what it felt like to worry about money, to feel helpless when life got overwhelming. He said that experience made you the perfect person to help others in similar situations. But the amounts of money we're dealing with, Grace, $50 million. The responsibility is enormous. I stood and walked to the filing cabinet where Vivian kept the foundation's records. Let me show you something. I pulled out a thick folder labeled Success Stories and spread the contents across her desk. Letters from families who'd received help with medical bills. Photos of children who'd received scholarships. Thank you cards from organizations that had received grants. In 6 months, you've helped 237 families. You've funded medical treatments, educational opportunities, housing assistance, and emergency relief. You've done more good in half a year than most people do in a lifetime. But I'm just following Harold's model. No, you're not. You're following your own instincts. Harold's charitable giving was systematic, strategic, focused on maximum impact. Your approach is more personal, more intuitive. You fund the cases that touch your heart, not just the ones that look good on paper. I picked up one of the thank you letters. This family, the Rodriguezes, they needed help with their daughter's cancer treatment. Harold's system would have required extensive documentation, financial verification, proof of need. You approved their grant after a single phone conversation because you heard the desperation in the mother's voice. That doesn't sound very businesslike. It sounds very human. And sometimes being human is more important than being businesslike. Vivian picked up another letter. This one from a teenager who'd received a scholarship to art school. Harold would have funded this. Probably not. Art school doesn't fit the traditional model of charitable giving. It's not addressing basic needs like food, shelter, or medical care. But you saw a talented kid who needed a chance and you gave it to him. Because I remembered what it felt like to have dreams that seemed impossible. Exactly. That's why Harold chose you, Vivian. Not because you were the most qualified person to run a foundation, but because you were the most qualified person to understand the people the foundation serves. There was a knock on the study door. Vivian's assistant, a young woman named Sarah, peeked in. Mrs. Whitmore, the Martinez family is here for their appointment. Send them in, Vivian said, then turned to me. This is the family I told you about. The father lost his job. They're facing eviction, and their son needs surgery they can't afford. The Martinez family entered tentatively, a middle-aged couple and their teenage son, all dressed in their best clothes, but clearly nervous about being in such an elegant house. I could see Vivian's expression soften as she looked at them, recognizing something of herself in their situation. Please, sit down, Vivian said warmly. Can Sarah get you anything? Coffee? Water? As Vivian began talking with the family, I watched her transform from the uncertain woman who'd been questioning her qualifications into the compassionate advocate Harold had known she could become. She listened to their story with complete attention, asked questions that showed she understood their struggles, and spoke to them with the respect of someone who'd never forgotten what it felt like to need help. The surgery your son needs, Vivian said to Mrs. Martinez. How much will it cost? $35,000. Mr. Martinez replied, his voice heavy with the weight of an impossible number. The insurance will cover some, but we still need $15,000 that we don't have. And the eviction notice, we're 3 months behind on rent. $4,000. Vivian made notes on a pad, calculating quickly. So you need about $20,000 total. The family nodded, probably expecting to be told that the amount was too large, that they'd need to provide more documentation, that their case would be reviewed by a committee. Instead, Vivian opened her desk drawer and pulled out a checkbook. I'm going to write you a check for $25,000, she said matter-of-factly. $20,000 for your immediate needs and $5,000 for any unexpected expenses that come up during your son's recovery." Mrs. Martinez started crying. Mr. Martinez stared at Vivian as if she'd just performed a miracle. Their son, who'd been silent throughout the meeting, whispered, "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Vivian said, handing them the check. "Thank my husband Harold. This foundation exists because he believed that people who have enough should help people who don't have enough. It's that simple." After the family left, Vivian sat back in her chair and looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Did you see their faces?" she asked. "I saw hope replacing despair. I saw a family that will stay together instead of being torn apart by circumstances beyond their control." Harold was right, wasn't he? About what matters most. Harold was right about a lot of things. But most of all, he was right about you. Vivian smiled, and for the first time since Harold's death, she looked truly happy. "Grace, I want to ask you something. Will you consider becoming the foundation's co-director? I need someone who understands Harold's vision, but also understands what we're trying to build." I thought about Harold, about the 23 years I'd spent helping him manage his business affairs, and about the chance to spend the rest of my career helping Vivian manage his true legacy. "I'd be honored," I said. Outside, the sun was setting over the garden Harold had loved, casting golden light through the study windows. Somewhere in the city, the Martinez family was probably calling relatives with good news. Somewhere else, other families were struggling with problems that seemed insurmountable. But in this room, Harold's real will was finally being executed, not the legal document that had divided his assets, but the deeper intention that had guided his life, the belief that love was measured not by what you kept, but by what you gave away. 1 year after Harold's death, I stood in the ballroom of the Whitmore Mansion, watching Vivian address a crowd of donors, recipients, and community leaders at the first annual Harold Whitmore Memorial Gala. The room was filled with people whose lives had been touched by the foundations, work families who'd received emergency assistance, students who'd received scholarships, organizations that had received grants. But what struck me most was the absence of Harold's children. Marcus had declined the invitation, citing business commitments. Patricia had sent regrets, claiming she was traveling abroad. David hadn't responded at all. They'd made their choice about their father's legacy, and it wasn't the choice Harold had hoped for. When my husband established this foundation, Vivian was saying from the podium, he did it quietly, without fanfare or recognition. He believed that charity should be about helping people, not building your reputation. Tonight, we're breaking that tradition of anonymity, not to celebrate ourselves, but to inspire others to join us in this work. I looked around the room at the faces of people Harold had helped without ever meeting them. A young woman who'd received a scholarship to medical school and was now a resident at Children's Hospital. A family whose small business had been saved by an emergency grant during the pandemic. An elderly man whose cancer treatment had been funded when his insurance ran out. These were Harold's true heirs, not the children who'd inherited his money, but the people who'd inherited his values. "Grace," a voice beside me said, "could I speak with you for a moment?" I turned to find Marcus standing there, looking uncomfortable in his expensive tuxedo. He'd come, after all, though he'd clearly tried to arrive unnoticed. "Of course," I said, following him to a quiet corner of the ballroom. "I've been thinking about what you said at the will reading," Marcus began, his voice barely audible over the crowd, "about Dad knowing who we really were. And you were right. About all of it. The way I saw the business as my birthright, the way I resented his charitable giving, the way I never really tried to understand what mattered to him." I waited, sensing there was more he needed to say. "The business is struggling," Marcus continued. "Dad's charitable commitments are eating into profits, and I've been fighting the urge to cut them. But every time I think about reducing the donations, I remember what you said about him documenting everything, watching everyone. Harold isn't watching anymore. Marcus, the only person you need to answer to now is yourself. That's what makes it harder. When I thought he was judging me, I could rebel against his expectations. Now that I know he was just hoping I'd become someone better than I was, I don't know how to live with disappointing him." Marcus looked across the ballroom at Vivian, who was now talking with a group of scholarship recipients. "She's doing something beautiful with his money, isn't she? She's doing what Harold always hoped someone would do. She's using wealth to create opportunity, to solve problems, to make the world a little bit better. And I'm using it to maintain my lifestyle and complain about profit. Margins. You're using it the way you always planned to use it. The question is whether that's still what you want." Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching a young man in a wheelchair receive an award for academic achievement, a student whose adaptive equipment had been funded by the foundation. "Grace, can I ask you something? If Dad were here tonight, what do you think he'd say to me?" I thought about Harold, about the man who'd spent his final years hoping his children would surprise him, who documented their failures not out of cruelty, but out of a desperate wish to be proven wrong. I think he'd say that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. That every day is a chance to choose values over convenience, purpose over profit. Even after everything. Even after I proved him right about my worst qualities. Especially then, Harold never stopped hoping you'd change. Marcus says that's why he left you the business with conditions instead of just giving it to someone else. He believed you were capable of growth. Marcus nodded slowly. "The charitable commitments, the $2 million a year. I've been thinking about increasing them instead of cutting them. Why? Because I've been reading Dad's journals, the ones you gave to Vivian. He wrote about the satisfaction he got from helping people, about how giving money away made him feel richer than keeping it ever had. And I want to understand what that feels like. I want to know what it's like to build something that matters instead of just maintaining. Something that's profitable." Across the room, Vivian was introducing a panel of foundation recipients who were sharing their stories. A single mother who'd become a nurse thanks to a scholarship, a veteran who'd started a nonprofit for homeless veterans with foundation funding, a teenager who'd invented a water purification device with money from the foundation's innovation grants. "Marcus," I said, "your father left you more than just a business. He left you an example of how to use success responsibly. Whether you follow that example is up to you. Will you help me? If I decide to expand the charitable giving to try to honor Dad's values instead of just his memory." I looked at this man who'd spent 40 years disappointing his father and was finally ready to try becoming someone worthy of his inheritance. "I'll help you," I said. "But not because Harold would have wanted me to. Because I think you're finally ready to want it for yourself." The gala continued around us. But Marcus and I stood in our quiet corner, talking about Harold's vision for the business, about the difference between profit and purpose, about the possibility of redemption even when the person you need to redeem yourself to is gone. Later, as the evening wound down, I found myself alone with Vivian in Harold's study. The room was quiet after the noise of the gala, filled with the comfortable silence of work well done. "It was a beautiful evening," I said. "Harold would have been proud. Do you think so? Even though his children weren't really part of it? Especially because of that. Harold always said that the measure of a person's values wasn't what they did when people were watching, but what they did when no one would ever know. Tonight proved that his values can survive and thrive even without his family's support." Vivian picked up a photo from her desk. Harold at last year's Christmas dinner, surrounded by his family, smiling despite the tensions that had defined their relationships. "I miss him," she said simply. "So do I, but Vivian, look what he built. Look what you're building in his honor." Harold's real will wasn't the document that divided his assets, it was the example he set for how to live a meaningful life. And we're executing that will every day. Every day, I agreed. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars, illuminating the lives of people who'd been helped by Harold's generosity and Vivian's compassion. In the morning, there would be more grant applications to review, more families to help, more opportunities to turn wealth into hope. But tonight, in the quiet of Harold's study, surrounded by the evidence of lives changed and dreams fulfilled, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing that love, properly invested, pays dividends forever. Harold's letter had revealed the truth about his family's motivations, but it had also revealed something more important, that the greatest inheritance isn't money or property, but the example of how to use whatever you have in service of something larger than yourself. And that inheritance, unlike any other, could never be contested, never be diminished, and never be taken away. The truest will is not written on paper, but lived in the choices we make when no one is watching.